которые передавали, они стреляли четко по улицам, ложили, вот, называли координаты и прям улицы простреливали, в Донецке там последовательно.
Это цветочки. Мы сейчас, если мы пройдем на Киевский проспект, я не могу вам дом сказать, там люди прятались. Бомбоубежище. Попал снаряд града прямо в бомбоубежище. У меня отца ранило. Я вам
в больницу.
В Калинина лопнул череп, но вроде нормально. Все зашили, женщина распоротая вся. Фамилия тетя Козлова. Что можно сказать вам? Здесь ни одного военного нет. Мирный поселок. Это моя мать живет. Я живу на Спартаке. Можно я это скажу? Можно я вам это? Спартака нет. Поселок Спартак. Это Ясиноватский район, 2 километра отсюда. Его нет. У меня дома нет. Я 15 лет его строил. За что мне это?
Он там прятался. Его ранило. За что ему?
Его ранило. За что?
Как бабахнуло, мы в коридор побежали.
Мы можем пригласить вас в квартиру нашу посмотреть.
Это ужас. Так страшно. До этого бомбили, мы у мамы были, сидели, прятались в сарае целый месяц. А теперь думали, тихо, будет перемирие, все хорошо. А теперь что? Война опять. Мне жалко ребенка, нам некуда ехать. Зарплата на ребенка даже не дают деньги. Вы понимаете? 2 месяца. 2 месяца не дают. Вы не представляете, как страшно за ребенка, не за себя, а за моего ребенка. Я же одна без мужа. И что будет с ребенком? Ладно, со мной, а куда ребенка? Куда? Кто об этом думает? Кто?
Да, это град. Да, вот попала к нам сюда. Сейчас второй вынесем, покажем. Красота.
Это подарки от Порошенко.
Привет, Порошенко.
Так сложилось, прилетела мина, мы даже ее не слышали. То есть или в суете, или как-то. Ну, вот прям мне осталось сделать 2 шага и зайти в подвал. У меня было ощущение, что я куда-то провалилась ногой в яму. И я думаю, ну я сейчас так вот руками обопрусь об землю и вытяну себя. Когда смотрю, а нога так вот неподвижно лежит в штанине, в джинсах. Ну, это все такие куча мыслей в одну секунду. Что со мной, почему я упала, а что с ногой? Ой, а вдруг сейчас еще мина прилетит, а я тут что-то расселась. Надо быстрее. Ну, соседка меня схватила вот так за ворот и затащила в подвал. Вот. Я дочке говорю, Дотя, у меня нет ноги. Она, мам, как нет ноги? Вот она у тебя нога, и туфелька висит. Я говорю, туфелька висит, а ноги нет.
Вы потушите вот там, потушите там, потому что газом воняет. 120 лимон.
Это работает мирный план Порошенко, который этот самый. Мирный план, вот так вот, как он рассказывает, задыхается. И Яценюка тоже самое. Всех и Турчинов. Всем привет. Всем привет. От всего Донбасса. Украина перед усе. Я был всегда за целостность Украины. Ну каким путем? Причем тут же мирные жители? Причем тут дети? Причем вот это? Куда же вы стреляете? Это с аэропорта стреляют, ваши стреляют. Мы уже знаем, кто, откуда летит, и как свистит. До свидания.
As Russia's military offensive in Ukraine enters its 9th day, blasts and gunfire are reported both in government-controlled areas and in the Donetsk and Lugansk republics. Meanwhile, the fire is reported in Europe's largest nuclear power plant as well. We'll get into that shortly. Also, as a second round of peace talks ends in Belarus, both sides agree to the setting up of humanitarian corridors for evacuees and a possible temporary ceasefire to allow citizens to leave. Talks on the conflict too between Emmanuel Macron and Vladimir Putin, but they end in frustration with the French and Russian leaders at loggerheads over key issues. And while the West continues with its indignation towards Russia's actions, a French journalist who's covered the conflict in eastern Ukraine for years claims the Kyiv government has been targeting civilians in the Donbass region.
He said that all of those people are Ukrainians, and the shelling is also conducted by Ukrainians?
Definitely.
Just after 5 in the morning here in Moscow on this, the first Friday of March. Welcome to the News Hour on RT. My name's Ewan O'Neill. Heavy fighting continues as Russia's military offensive in Ukraine enters a 9th day, with Europe's largest nuclear power plant reported to have become a battleground. Security camera footage circulating in the media shows smoke at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, with management at the site saying it was caused by a fire at the administrative building. Radiation levels are said to be normal, and one of the power units has been shut down as a precaution. Firefighters are now at the scene. It's still unclear what sparked the blaze. Ukraine accuses Russian forces of shelling the plants, and we have contacted the Defense Ministry for comment. When we get it, we will bring it to you. Meanwhile, in the western Ukrainian city of Lvov, volunteers have been building a bomb shelter in one of its parks. It's designed to hold around 100 people, and one of the workers spoke to the media.
We are volunteering here and we helping to clean bomb shelter because Lviv is still not in danger, but we have to be prepared for Russian invasion. Everything changed in 1 hour, so I heard the bomb explosion in Kyiv. I live in center, I live in peaceful district of the city, and it was immediately I understood that the war started and reality is different.
Well, Ukraine's president has once again asked for a no-fly zone to be set up over Ukraine or for more fighter jets to be delivered. He also made a passionate plea to Vladimir Putin, while saying he didn't understand the security guarantees Ukraine's expected to give.
Гарантии что? Мы в НАТО? Нет. У нас есть ядерное оружие? Нет. Что я должен сказать? Кому я должен что-то дать? Я нормальный мужик. Сядь со мной. Поговори. Чего ты боишься?
And on the other side of the conflict in the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics, residents continue to endure intense battles between the Ukrainian military and local militia forces. We have received footage of some of the damage in Gorlovka in the Donbass region where shelling was reported. The city's mayor published this video of a home hit during the fighting. Emergency services have been trying to restore basic utilities like water and electricity. We also got sent video from 2 villages in the Lugansk Republic whose forces say they have taken control of a Ukrainian army stronghold and a vehicle checkpoint. Local authorities claim Ukrainian soldiers have now been forced out of more than 40 towns and villages in the Donbass. RT's Maria Fanoshna filed this report from one of them.
We're now driving closer to the front line, to the areas that the army here calls liberated areas. And it's a completely different picture here. We just left Lugansk. We arrived in the town of Nova Aidar, about 100 kilometers north of Lugansk, just day after the Russian army took it under their control. You can see it doesn't look like there was any fighting here, and we were told that's because the Ukrainian army was not actually resisting. They were abandoning their positions, leaving behind weaponry, vehicles, armored vehicles, and actually everything. Looks absolutely peaceful. Yellow and blue, Ukrainian flags are still everywhere here. For 8 years since Kyiv launched its counter-terrorism operation against what were then Ukraine's easternmost regions of Donetsk and Lugansk, this town, as well as, by the way, all the towns and villages in the area, has been living under Ukrainian rule. And we heard from locals, what was that like? See, this one is crossed. That means there are new rulers here.
Well, of course, at first it was hard when Ukraine came, and then everyone just got used to it. Fighting is hard. And the attitude, we've never been loved here.
You know, at first, one of my grandchildren who was 2 years old kept saying, "Grandma, they're bombing, I'm scared." Well, I calmed him down, everyone is scared. It's a very difficult time. We're worried about people on that side and the other side, and also worried for you.
We were told that this is where Ukraine's security service headquarters were in this town. Here's the Ukrainian flag, as you can see. We're gonna go check. They say it's in the basement. Things are scattered all over the place. And it's clear people were living this place in a hurry. This is where the office of the head of this little region used to be. Locals used to call this building a White House, and there are signs here in Ukrainian. It says, "Attention, attention, attention." It's about evacuation of local residents. If you want to leave this place, they say there are buses leaving from Central Square every day at noon.
Why would I leave? My beloved is at the cemetery here. We hope peace will come here.
You can say that life is slowly coming back to this town, but military vehicles are the only wheels I've seen in this town. There are different forces fighting here on one side. This is the army of the Republic of Lugansk. They are now going to the front line to rejoin with the Russian army.
These forces were advancing from different directions. Now, when they meet, quick handshakes, pat on the back, they will continue together. Marie Fnoshna, RT from the Lugansk Republic.
Russia, meanwhile, says Ukraine is deliberately putting the civilian population at risk by using them as human shields. President Putin made the claim at his security conference.
Nationalists and neo-Nazi groups with foreign mercenaries in their ranks, also including those coming from the Middle East, use citizens as human shields. I've already told you that there is solid evidence. There are images clearly showing them deploy military hardware in residential districts.
Now, also a second round of peace talks wrapped up a number of hours ago in Belarus, with both sides agreeing to set up humanitarian corridors. With more details on what looks like a significant development, here's RT's Konstantin Roshkov.
Russia and Ukraine agreed on humanitarian corridors. They will be organized in urban areas affected by heavy fighting so that the civilians who found themselves stranded between the military could evacuate safely. Both parties also agreed to deliver food and medicine to these areas, as well as to impose limited and temporary ceasefires that would only be maintained during the time when people are being evacuated. The head of the Russian delegation, Vladimir Medinsky, said that humanitarian issues were front and center during the meeting, and also urged common Ukrainians who stuck in the war zone to use these passages, or, he added, do something so that the fighting isn't necessary. A top aide to the Ukrainian president, who was present at the meeting, also welcomed the fact that the two sides agreed on humanitarian corridors. However, he admitted that the two sides, both delegations, had failed to reach any progress in other areas. It means that the fightings in Ukraine will continue. However, there is a way now for civilians to escape. Earlier, Moscow accused Kyiv of using people in cities as human shields by placing military hardware in residential areas next to schools and hospitals. There will be a third round of negotiations to firm up tonight's agreements and sort out their implementation. Both sides agreed to meet up again in a couple of days.
We also got the take, and it was an interesting one, from the former Director General of the United Nations office in Geneva on the conflict playing out in Ukraine. Here's some of what said.
As a diplomat, I always like negotiations, and I prefer, let's say, negotiations. Like our former foreign minister, Mr. Gromyko, said that much better to have 10 years of negotiations than 1 day of war. But history proves that war is inevitable, whether you would like it or not. But war in this case was inevitable, and we actually warned for several times, publicly, privately, in our documents, in the statements, that Ukraine Ukraine aggression against Donetsk and Lugansk will cause the Russian response to protect Russian population, and we cannot tolerate such an enemy on our border that will be used as an enemy, as a tool to harass Russia militarily, politically, ideologically, economically, in whatever way.
Also want to bring this to you today. A French journalist has been criticized for claiming locals in the Donbass region are being targeted by the Ukrainian government. Anne-Laure Bonnell has been filming in the war-torn eastern Ukraine area since 2015 and spoke about her experience on air, on TV, in France, although the presenter didn't seem convinced.
There are dead and wounded. I film them every day. I take photos every day to save as proof. I do not have any political message to express. But just so you know, this conflict has been widely discussed for a week, but it has lasted already 8 years and caused the deaths of 13,000 people. People are devastated. All of them are Ukrainians, and they're extremely surprised that Europe is now aware of the situation. All of this shelling, hiding and living in basements, heavy artillery everywhere. I was filming this back in 2015, but I repeat, this has been going on since 2014.
Sorry to interrupt. Not all of us know about the situation as much as you do, since you've been following it for so many years. Something you said surprised me. You said that all of those people are Ukrainians, and the shelling is also conducted by Ukrainians?
Definitely. This is something really important, and somehow it's being ignored. Residents of the Donbass began to be targeted by their own government in 2014. Russian-speaking citizens fell victim to shelling by Kyiv government. It's true. I have proof. I can show it as soon as I go back to France. I have a whole documentary. It's undeniable.
But today the shelling is being carried out by Russians or Ukrainians?
The Ukrainians are shelling where I am now. The Ukrainian government bombed its citizens. Children had to live in basements for months. The film that I made in 2015 has proof of these crimes against humanity. I take responsibility for my words and urge you to watch it. The other day I was at a school. 2 teachers were hit by an explosion. Their bodies were cut in 2. I uploaded these photos to Facebook. I've met elderly women who could not leave this area. Civilians are falling victim to heavy artillery, rocket launchers. I'm not very good with weapons, but I can confirm that here in the Donbass, in the Russian-speaking part, residential areas are still being shelled today. Yesterday, Donetsk was bombed.
And you think these bombings are being conducted by the central Ukrainian authorities?
Yes.
Meanwhile, reports say the French President Emmanuel Macron was left frustrated following a phone call with Vladimir Putin over Russia's actions in Ukraine. According to the Kremlin, the Russian leader rejected the majority of Macron's arguments during a 90-minute conversation. Telling us more about that, Charlotte Dubinsky.
The worst is yet to come. A very stark assessment by France's president on the situation in Ukraine. Now, that followed yet another long phone call with his counterpart, President Putin of the Russian Federation, with an aide to Macron saying that apparently the French leader believes that Putin is intent on seizing the whole of the country of Ukraine. Now, a French official also suggested that Putin told Macron that the war in Ukraine was going to plan, but Macron was pretty blunt when he told him that he was making a major mistake, saying, "You're lying to yourself." It's understood that Putin continued to assert that Russia is trying to demilitarize and to denazify Ukraine, but President Macron wasn't holding back, very bluntly saying that Ukraine wasn't a Nazi regime. Macron's own assessment of the call was pretty pessimistic, according to this tweet.
I spoke to President Putin this morning. He refuses to stop his attacks on Ukraine at this point. It is vital to maintain dialogue to avoid human tragedy. I will continue my efforts and contacts. We must avoid the worst.
Macron is then said to have spoken to the Ukrainian President Zelensky to say that he believed that the Russian leader was determined to pursue a military operation right to the very end. Now, following that call between Macron and Putin, an Elysee official also told reporters here in France that the country is thinking of toughening sanctions even more against Russia. They said that the current sanctions first, though, needed to be evaluated and then that they would be complemented. And the sanctions have already started to bite those who are here in France. A super yacht belonging to one Russian oligarch was seized by customs officials on the Mediterranean coast. In other developments, EU ministers have also been meeting to approve for the very first time the use of the Temporary Protection Directive. Now, it will give those refugees who are fleeing Ukraine temporary protection, as it suggests. It will also mean that they'll get EU residency and the rights that come along with that residency, access to healthcare and to education for a year, and that will be able to be renewed.
We managed to have a unanimous decision on the Temporary Protection Directive. It's never been used, even though it's been existing for 20 years. When this comes into force, everybody can have the protection directly. They can work, they can have help with accommodation, children can go to school. There will be no waiting time here, and this is really, really important.
Now, as you heard there, it was hyped up as being a pretty major announcement, but there were some in the press room that questioned whether actually this had been watered down. Now, that's because the scope of the directive is actually a lot wider than what is being implemented. It is wide enough to include giving those protections to third nation nationals. That means individuals from other countries who were working in Ukraine or studying in Ukraine legally, who have also had to flee the country as a result of the war. However, the directive, as it's been enacted, will only be applicable to Ukrainians. Now, there's also a warning that while the EU has seen an influx of around 1 million refugees in just 1 week alone, that many more could be on their way. The EU shouldn't be naive, the Commissioner said. Millions of refugees will create challenges. However, she believes that the EU is in a much better position since the migration crisis in 2015 to ensure that those protections would be upheld, at least for Ukrainian citizens.
Well, with the EU showing a united stance in its efforts to help Ukrainian refugees, protests have been held throughout Europe and around the world at Russia's actions. In Berlin, 5,000 students had their say outside the Bundestag, calling for peace. While in the Bulgarian capital, Sofia, people celebrated its National Day, holding Ukrainian flags. Demonstrations also took place in London, with those rallying, carrying anti-war banners at Trafalgar Square. And in the Middle East, in Israel, dozens of protesters gathered as well to collect humanitarian aid for the Ukrainian people. Athletes, art, cats and dogs are now banned if they are from Russia. US politicians and social network users alike have bluntly said there are simply no innocent Russians. That's as anti-Russian hysteria provoked by the scenes coming out of Ukraine has become a new reality. Igor Zhedanov takes up the story.
An avalanche of sanctions is hurling down upon Russia. And as foreign powers hope for every next blow to knock Moscow out cold, smaller private entities are also doing everything to chip in. And in their bid, being so eager to join the frenzy, some veer into straight burlesque territory. For example, Russian cats are being banned over Russia's actions in Ukraine. Music to the ears of dog lovers, but no, Russia-born dogs are being banned from participating in kennel exhibitions. Literally nothing living is safe. A Russian tree has been banned from competing for the Tree of the Year award, which apparently exists. And Russian culture hasn't escaped the punishment either. A college in Italy cancelled a class on Dostoevsky, but backtracked after this.
What is happening in Italy is ridiculous. Not only being a living Russian is wrong in Italy today, but also being a dead Russian, who was sentenced to death in 1849 because he read a forbidden thing. The fact that an Italian university would ban a course on an author like Dostoevsky is unbelievable.
Now, the list of companies boycotting Russia is updated every minute. From tech giants to IKEA shutting down its stores and showrooms to Lego to movie companies cancelling its Russia releases. Russian athletes have been ostracized too, including the Paralympians.
The committee has changed its own decision and suspended Russian and Belarusian athletes from taking part in the Games. That's despite the Olympic truce, where the principles of unity were proclaimed. We believe the decision is politicized discrimination against our athletes.
Such a blanket and indiscriminate approach is cheered by officials. Every Russian is a pariah, according to a now deleted tweet by a former US ambassador to Moscow.
There are no more innocent, neutral Russians anymore. Everyone has to make a choice, support or oppose this war. The only way to end this war is if 100,000s, not thousands, protest against this senseless war. Putin can't arrest you all.
And while many certainly liked this and shared it, others didn't.
This is the ex-US ambassador to Russia echoing the ideology of terrorists like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. This fascist idea that there are no innocent people leads to terror attacks on civilians. Imagine if people said this about Americans after the US wars on Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, etc.
Bin Laden's argument for why US civilians were legit targets was they choose their leaders and thus are responsible for their acts. That was widely, and accurately, viewed as reprehensible. Even more odd to claim Putin as a totalitarian dictator, but all Russians are guilty.
There are no innocent Russians? Does this mean that every American citizen can be held responsible for the crimes of our own government now? Careful now. That's how bin Laden justified the 9/11 attack.
Russia hysteria is beyond parody, state the headlines. That's as the West, it seems, is running out of moves.
Well, there's a war hysteria going on. So therefore, there's a desire to punish all things Russian. Michael McFaul, the former U.S. ambassador to Russia, says that all Russians are guilty. They don't distinguish between governments and people. If the Russian government does something that they don't like, they tend to blame all Russians for it. High or low, whether they're in government or not. So that's a new kind of cancel culture, definitely. It's just nationalism running wild. And nationalism is a very ugly force. It's a first cousin to racism. It targets all Russians indiscriminately. It strikes out blindly. It's ignorant. I think it'll lead to an intensification of the crisis. The more the government succeeds in drumming up this kind of hysteria, this kind of blind hatred, the more public support it will have for ramping up hostilities against Russia, for supplying the Ukraine with arms, and maybe even getting involved in the war itself.
A tragedy for athletes. That's how Moscow slammed a U-turn by the International Paralympic Committee on the participation of Russian and Belarusian sportspeople at the Beijing Games. In the wake of Moscow's military operation against Ukraine, the committee had forced the two nations to participate as neutrals. But just the day before the Paralympics were to begin this Friday, the IPC have now banned all 83 athletes altogether. Russia's sports minister says the ruling destroys thousands of years of the Olympic truce, the agreement that all people should be allowed to compete together.
We are disappointed by the International Paralympic Committee's decision. It was unexpected for us. The committee has changed its own decision and suspended Russian and Belarusian athletes from taking part in the Games. That's despite the Olympic truce, where the principles of unity were proclaimed. We believe the decision is politicized discrimination against our athletes. It's unfair to those who've been through 4 years of hard preparation. It is a tragedy for them. We will do everything to protect the interests of our athletes, to prevent discrimination on the basis of nationality. We are considering holding competitions here so the training doesn't go to waste. We will also challenge the decision in court, but that will take time.
And para-athlete Dmitry Ignatov says the ban has come as a shock to everyone, as this was the last opportunity for some to make a lifelong dream of competing against the world's best a reality.
It's shocking for us. For some it was a first chance, but for some it's the last chance to take part in the Paralympics. They might never be in such good shape again. Of course the athletes are innocent. They're just Paralympic sportsmen and women who just do their job, who train a lot, who sacrifice a lot to succeed, to get their medal, to hear their national anthem, to motivate and inspire others. Our Paralympic Committee will do everything to protect our athletes. They will hire the best lawyers to find a way to lift the ban. I think we will get through it and take part in the next Paralympics. I think the whole International Olympic and Paralympic Games concept was created to unite people, to show our kindness, to remind that we live on one planet and we take care of it. We should respect each other.
Yeah, there is a sadness to that, isn't there? Now, despite claims by Western politicians that the crippling sanctions slammed on Russia won't affect ordinary people, the International Cancer Specialist Network, OncoAlert, has severed all cooperation with Russian doctors out of solidarity with Ukraine. The World Health Organization lists cancer as a leading cause of death worldwide. And OncoAlert is a network of oncologists whose common stated goal is to end the disease. Nevertheless, a recent social media post shows they won't now be helping to do that in Russia. The head of the Russian Presidential Council for Human Rights believed no matter the circumstances, healthcare should always be kept outside of politics.
This is some kind of revenge, not just on the country of Russia. It's revenge on cancer patients who live in Russia. This is beyond good and evil.
Despite the decision by OncoAlert, Russian oncologist Andrei Karpin says Russian doctors are still cooperating with many other international organizations.
We cannot say it's a widespread story. We maintain relationships with the largest and best-known oncological organizations, and we haven't felt any deterioration in our relationship yet. Of course, we hope that this will not happen. Moreover, I believe the OncoAlert organization will return to cooperation with us, and reason will prevail. In Soviet times, we were isolated for a very long time, and yet we had excellent medicine, some of the best doctors. None of us are insured from ending up in a sickbed. No one is protected from cancer, not even doctors. That is why there should be no politics here.
Something else interesting to bring you, the list of companies that have either turned their backs on Russia over its military offensive in Ukraine or imposed punishing sanctions against the country is growing by the day. Western brands are simply abandoning the country. Apple, H&M, Nike are among the mega brands banning imports of their goods. Another, the world-famous furniture store IKEA, it's hugely popular among Russians. And in Moscow, long queues formed outside stores a day before all sales were suspended. Despite the fact the decision to quit Russia will hurt financially, many companies have seemingly concluded that reputational risk is too great to continue. Meanwhile, the Russian Prosecutor General's office has demanded access to the websites of two media outlets that have been critical of the country's military offensive in Ukraine to be blocked. The sites are for RAIN, which is already classified as a foreign agent, TV station, as well as the radio station Echo of Moscow. Authorities claim they were publishing false information about the actions of the Russian army in Ukraine. Also on Thursday, the Russian Foreign Ministry stated the BBC was trying to undermine the internal political situation and security in Russia. Okay, this is RT. Stay with us for an explainer of why Donbass in eastern Ukraine turned into one of the most volatile places on the planet in 2014 and why its residents continue to fear the future.
Большинство из пострадавших это были мирные жители. На местах их дислокации были обнаружены массовые захоронения мирных жителей, даже беременных женщин.
Он однажды меня спросил: мама, как ты относишься к этим событиям, которые произошли в Одессе?
Более 25 тысяч гражданских объектов разрушено. Более 2000 стариков, женщин, детей убиты.
Непонятно, по каких причинам украинский народ просто уничтожает сам себя.
Никогда после этого всего мириться или возвращаться в Украину никогда.
The massive sanctions war against Russia is having a profound impact on the global economy. Instead of just punishing Russian citizens, consumers in the West and the developing world will also experience economic pain. Globalization itself is being interrupted. The great separation is upon us.
Ну, оператором я стал, когда я приехал в Донецк, и нужна была работа, и мне попалось на глаза объявление, что требуются операторы на местный телеканал. Ну, скажем так, за 1,5 года до войны научили, я вошел в эту профессию. И вот когда начались эти все события у нас происходить, я смог реализоваться в них, войти в них как оператор. Мы тогда с семьей жили прямо возле аэропорта, на следующей параллельной улице от Стратонавтов, известная улица. Но когда еще здесь все было целое, мы иногда, когда еще здесь пытались жить, прятались в подвал. Вот здесь можно видеть, он еще есть. Вот наш вход в подвал. Мы, когда началась война, туда снесли, значит, какое-то продовольствие, документы, деньги. Все это запаковали в сумки, потому что было, конечно, непонятно, вдруг что-то внезапно произойдет с домом, с имуществом, чтобы хотя бы самое основное было у нас в целости. И сюда, в подвал, мы несколько раз спускались, когда еще пытались здесь жить на поселке. И вот однажды там поступил звонок, что в наш дом прилетело. Как, что там? Да, вот прилетело. Поехали, посмотрели. Ну, к счастью, просто дыра огромная образовалась там между 2-м и 1-м этажем. Какой-то снаряд прилетел. Ну, без катастрофических последствий, так скажем, 300-й дом стал. Вот. Ну, заделали там какими-то там досками, баннером огромным. В общем, залатали, лишь бы, чтобы дождь, снег не попадал туда потом. Ну, все. Заделали, забили, уехали обратно. Ну, а потом очередной прилет, и загорелось. Звонят нам, что вот ваш дом горит. Все, ваш дом горит. Стены все стерпят. Кто-то разрушился, кто-то сгорел. Это все наживное. Когда жертвы, это уже совсем иной порядок, конечно, отношения к съемке. И вот, как я говорю, что да, приезжаешь на место, и если чувствуешь запах такой сгоревшей плоти, понимаешь, что здесь кого-то просто разнесло на мелкие кусочки. И я понимаю, что это в эфир никто не даст. Но я все равно это все снимал, и я понимал, что это наша история. И каждый раз, приезжая на подобный обстрел, ну да, стараюсь как можно ближе, как можно плотнее показать, что вот на самом деле, вот что у нас вот происходит. Ну, лучше один раз увидеть, чем 100 раз услышать, да, что была война. Ну, надо снимать.
Для дальнейшего наступления на город.
Ми будемо наступати. І будемо звільняти нашу землю. Непродовження припинення вогню – це наша відповідь терористам, бойовикам і мародерам.
Выстрел. Ждем прилета.
И стреляют все время. Сегодня в час ночи, это уже что было. Он на Ленинском Забалке, там 20 домов сразу же, все загорело. Порошенке хотелось бы сказать, что он делает. Пусть бы своих детей, всю свою семью кинул вот в этот очаг, как мы здесь сидим. Что это такое закрытое тут? Нашей крови ему мало, уже и так уже по локти весь в крови, уже загнулся, дальше уже некуда. Может быть, достаточно всего уже этого. Сколько еще может такое продолжаться?
В конце августа, когда уже просто стало невыносимо, руководство республики приняло решение о том, что нужно подтянуть свои силы и резервы сюда, ближе к аэропорту, чтобы попытаться выбить украинские войска из аэропорта, чтобы лишить их возможности постоянно, каждый день обстреливать Донецк.
Так, всем готовность номер 0. Алло. Да, Гиви. Я захожу в поселок, по 4 человека на перекресток буду зачищать. Внимание! Малыми группами они выходят с аэропорта. Идем сейчас цепью, там распределяемся по кварталам, не даем никому выйти. С нами Бог, никто ничего не боится.
Несмотря на постоянные обстрелы города, несмотря на то, что ополченцы каждый день видели смерть своих близких, соседей, друзей, перед началом штурма они предложили тогда украинским солдатам покинуть аэропорт. Они готовы были дать им возможность уйти из города.
Они уже достали нам 1 числа детей в школу отправлять. Они сегодня разбомбили школу, детский садик. Не можем мы так допускать уже. Так что перемирие они не соблюдали. Почему должны мы его соблюдать? На их ответ, что по ЖД вокзалу, что по школе, мы пойдем на штурм. Вышка Абхазу. Ребята, не истерите, выйдите в эфир. Повтори. Да тихо. Сейчас. Что насчет нашего предложения закончить миром? Решает. Сколько времени вам надо? Просто реально говорю, ребята, подкрепления там нету. Не надейтесь.
Я принял, но это не от меня зависит.
Вышка Абхазу. У вас есть 15-20 минут край.
Однако украинское военное командование не приняло такого предложения. Приказ уходить украинские военнослужащие так и не получили. А наоборот, они продолжили вести огонь по Донецку, используя диспетчерскую вышку аэропорта как смотровую площадку для корректировки огня по жилым кварталам.
Одной из важных задач было поддерживать огонь по диспетчерской вышке, с которой, собственно говоря, украинские военные вели корректировку артиллерийского огня батарей своих, которые стояли на песках.
Как бы там ни было, то я не шел против Украины воевать, против украинского народа. Я не шел воевать за то, чтобы была Россия. Я шел за то, чтобы не убивали мирных граждан, которые просто решили сделать вот такой выбор. Ну, то есть это выбор человека, хочет или не хочет. Каждый мог сделать выбор. Приехали вооруженные люди, начали стрелять в безоружных мирных людей за то, что они пытались оставить как-то свою точку зрения.
You know, it's not going to stop the fighting right now. Is it worthwhile?
I think what's worthwhile is the way in which the White House has rallied the world, gotten everybody on board. The sanctions have been very tough, tougher than against any major economy before. They are exacting a real price. I think going after the oligarchs is a good next step. I think that escalating these sanctions makes sense. I fear, Anderson, that the only one that will matter is the ultimate one, which we will have to think about, which is oil and gas. Because all of the other things we're doing, even with these oligarchs, I mean, this is an indirect way of getting at some of the people who support Putin. We have to go to the heart of the issue. The heart of the issue is the oil and gas revenues that keep the Russian state afloat, that keep Putin in power, and there are ways to do it. The United States today is the world's largest producer of oil and gas in the world. We could ramp up production. We could suspend sanctions on Venezuela and get Venezuela. We could talk to the Saudis. You know, I know all of it sounds a little unpalatable, but we are facing an existential crisis. Vladimir Putin is trying to destroy the world order that was built after 1945, and he is decimating a nation in doing so. The battle, we have joined the battle. The only question now is the United States and is the civilized world going to win, or is Putin going to win? And the best path to strangle, choke, pressure him is cut off his oil and gas revenues. There is a lot of oil and gas in the world. We can find ways to turn it on, but deny Russia the revenues that come from, kill the goose that's laying the golden eggs.
Fareed Zakaria, appreciate it. Thank you. We're monitoring the fire at that nuclear power plant. We'll also bring you any new information, of course, as we get it. Coming up, the man who was once the richest oligarch in this war. That's next.
I don't think he has enough time to actually make them happen. And I think that the fact that they did not create a bank of targets, of oligarchs, the resources, that they do things only partially, so they talk the talk, Biden talks it, but he does not walk the walk. Certainly not.
Let's talk about the oil. I mean, prices are skyrocketing.
Yes.
The Middle Eastern producers are not producing.
That's the amazing thing. I mean, if you think about Libya, Libya was a power, it was a country. It's also close to Italy. So if it produced oil at the full rate that it's capable of doing, that would be a significant alternative for Russia. The same thing. I mean, yes, OPEC's role is to basically curb or limit the production of oil so that oil prices go up, but now it goes crazy. So I think that for some reason they did not, maybe some countries are not stable, but they did not open the taps enough.
I thought the Americans had a deal with the Saudis, Qataris. Where's that?
Yeah, absolutely. And the assumption was that when there's no oil, the Americans would produce shale oil, and they would actually start exporting large quantity. This did not happen yet. So one thing is obvious, the world needs to use its reserves. So that's exactly the moment. We need to take your reserves and drink them up, hoping that this would somehow level up the prices, because the prices are going crazy.
No, the pressure on as a result of this and other things, the pressure on the financial markets is huge.
Yes.
And for how long?
Well, it is, first of all, it's huge in Russia, because the Russian stock market collapsed totally. I mean, nothing is worth anything. So that's probably an opportunity, because obviously it's going to go up in the future. But I think it's such a suspicious market that people feel uneasy to invest in it. So I guess people who invest in defense industries, in the countries that sell weapons or defense systems, these are the companies that are going to make money and benefit from the war.
Do you think this is like a very long-term crisis in the financial markets?
Well, it's a combination. That's why it's so difficult to see. It's like a perfect storm, because we had the COVID, so all the governments printed money, there's inflation, there's uncertainty. We came out of the COVID with unemployment, there's uncertainty, all the logistics problems, uncertainty.
And now we have a war.
And now we have a war, and maybe even a nuclear one. I don't believe it's going to be a nuclear one, but people are trying to pump the nuclear option. Yeah. So markets, I think, have lost it. They're completely hysterical.
So people are running away from markets now, but long term, we'll be back?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Like always?
Like always.
Like always.
So like always, you see the people losing confidence, running out of the market, coming
Ukraine. Our breaking news, a fire at that plant, the largest in Europe. The plant spokesperson telling Anderson moments ago it could result in a nuclear accident. Could result, we don't know. We're keeping an eye on it. The U.S. has activated the nuclear incident response team. There are mixed reports about fighting at the plant having stopped, and radiation levels are currently normal. But only one power generation unit out of 6 is operational. Let's bring in now, as I promised before the break, CNN military analyst, retired Lieutenant Colonel Mark Hertling. Thank you very much, Lieutenant General, I should say. I appreciate you joining us. We don't know exactly what happened here, but the idea that Russian forces would be shooting at this nuclear power plant, waging war at this location, it's total madness. What does it say about the Russian soldiers and their leadership, quite frankly?
Well, what I'll tell you, Don, I missed the day at West Point when they taught nuclear physics, so I can't comment on that. But I do know enough to say that this is either incompetence, indiscipline, an extremely uninformed or dangerously purposeful plan to do something bad, or it's criminality to the extreme degree. You know, when you have a fight in the area of something like this, I understand what they might be thinking, and it fits in with the Russian way of war. They're trying to displace as many citizens as they can, as we've seen in other places where they fought, and they do that by turning off the water and turning off the lights. So somebody may have had the bright idea, we can turn off the lights in 25% of Ukraine by knocking out this nuclear power plant, but it also shows how incredibly stupid they are.
How could they possibly think that this is a legitimate target? I mean, I understand wanting... Yeah, go on.
Yeah, they can't, Don. I mean, how can they possibly think apartment buildings are targets for cluster munitions or thermobarometric bombs? How can they think putting a missile on the top of a university floor is a legitimate target when there's no military within miles? How can they think they can bomb entire neighborhoods and level a city in order to achieve their objectives? This is the Russian way of war lately. It's intimidation, it's terrorism, and it's just incredibly stupid and criminal. And the more I watch this campaign, Don, the more it strikes me that either the entire Russian army has taken on the evil personality of Putin, which I think is partly true, or they're just extremely incompetent in their planning and the execution of military activities.
It could be both. They could have taken on and they're incompetent at the same time. The biggest question I have, though, for you is when looking at this, it angers so many people and you wonder what the hell is going on? How could they possibly think any of this is okay? Could this change how the U.S. and NATO respond to this unfolding crisis, General?
Yeah, I think we're going to continue to see tougher and tougher actions by both the U.S. and NATO. But Don, there's that weight, and it troubles me. You know, the decision making is, do you want to turn what is currently a regional conflict, which is horrible and horrific to the nth degree? Do you want to change that from a regional conflict, which is killing a lot of people and harming a lot of people, into the potential for a global war? That's the difference between taking risk and gambling. You can't mitigate a gamble. You can mitigate taking risk. But, you know, as horrible as this seems, and as many Americans want to get involved in this with uniformed forces, that's what you're debating. And it gets to the points of having a no-fly zone or putting forces on the ground or doing a number of things. And I think that's what the administration and the NATO leadership is weighing right now. How do you stop this madman from going any further? Or do you attempt over a long term to get it under control? And I think, you know, that's the unfortunate conundrum we find ourselves in right now.
I don't know if there's really a choice. I think from the beginning of this, I said, I know the president didn't want to have troops on the ground and so forth, but I think that we are going to get dragged into this no matter what. And because Vladimir Putin, nothing is deterring him. Sanctions aren't deterring him. I think the only deterrent for him is it has to be brute force, sadly. I'm not a military person, but I'm just...
Yeah, I think we really need to take a longer view, Don. We're 8 days into this thing right now. It is not going well. There's a lot of killing going on, killing of civilians, but I still have a great deal of faith in the long term of the Ukrainian forces and the Ukrainian population in turning this around. Mr. Putin has not gained any of his strategic objectives. He has not divided NATO. He has not further divided the United States. In fact, he's actually unified us, slowly unified us to a greater degree. He has not achieved his objective of subjugating Ukraine, which is one of his key objectives. And he is turned into a criminal on the world stage, and it's getting worse by the day. He will never be accepted back into any league of nations leaders in the near future. He is a pariah, and it's anathema to be dealing with him right now. And he's only making it worse by the day. I can't see him re-entering any kind of leadership role, either in Russia or across the globe, where he would be accepted by people of normal intellect and those who want to move societies forward.
Well, listen, I'll leave the viewers with what you said, because your expertise and knowledge on this certainly weighs more than what I might think. So thank you for that, and I appreciate it. I hope you're right. I think you are right. Thank you very much, General Hertling. Ukraine's president vowing to stand against Russia, asking the world how many Ukrainians have to be killed to get the kind of help he needs. His former spokesperson is here right after this.
I'm Delia Gallagher in Rome, and this is CNN.
So we're back now with the breaking news of fire at Ukraine's largest nuclear power plant tonight. It has been burning for hours. The plant spokesperson telling Anderson moments ago it could result in a nuclear accident. There are mixed reports about fighting at the plant having stopped, and radiation levels are currently normal, but only one power generation unit out of 6 is operational at this point. The U.S. has activated the nuclear incident response team, and President Biden has spoken by phone with Ukraine's President Zelensky. I want to bring in now Yulia Mendal, a former spokesperson for President Zelensky. Yulia, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it. As a journalist and a former official, and as a Ukrainian citizen, how do you feel hearing this development that a nuclear power plant is on fire?
Thank you for having me here. Actually, we don't know how much Putin's criminal intention is going to extend. I think we're having a monkey with a grenade here, and we try to do everything not to irritate it so it does not throw this grenade. And we think that this is already something that needs to make the West wake up. And actually, no-fly zone is already turning into a humanitarian measure that needs to be done to save people's lives and to prevent nuclear catastrophe. We don't know the reaction of the West right now after the nuclear plant has got its fire, but I think that a reaction will be very soon. And it can be some shifting point in this military invasion of Russia that started 9 days ago in Ukraine.
Listen, we're having a little bit of a technical difficulty with the sound, but I just want to ask you, you said you want the West to wake up. You talked about the no-fly zone. What exactly do you want the West to do? What would you like to see happen now?
This is actually one of the last measures that Ukraine was asking the West to have a no-fly zone in Ukraine. So Russia has got its superiority in air, and there was no any chance that Russia would come to the Kyiv, to the capital of Ukraine, Kyiv, so fast as Russia actually came just on the second day of the invasion. And this is because Russia has air superiority. We want that NATO helps us stop Russia on the air, and the issue is that now NATO has all the power to do this. We do not know if it will be done later, because it can be just too late if we think about, we will see what's going on. Putin is unstoppable, and he actually shows the West that he will try to experiment as much as possible, and he is uncontrollable up to now. Even all the sanctions that were used already to kill Russian economy do not work, just because Putin does not care about his people and about his neighbors and about any kind of human rights or development that is actually the priority for the Western world. If you remember when Putin was having a talk just like 9 or 10 days ago, before he recognized the quasi-republics on the Ukrainian territory of Donbass, he was not actually angry only at Ukraine. He was very irritated and angry about the West, about the world order that has existed after the World War II, and about NATO specifically. So his intention and his major target is not Ukraine. He even doesn't consider that Ukraine is the subject to talk with. He considers that Ukraine must be taken just, because he thinks it's true. And then he's going to turn his weaponry towards the West. Poland, Moldova, and Baltic states have no doubt in.
I want to get and ask you, this is very important because you were President Zelensky's spokesperson. The whole world has been watching his leadership. Are you concerned about him and his safety?
I'm concerned about the safety of my country, and the President Zelensky showed for many times that he will be with his people to the very end. So, of course, I'm concerned about President Zelensky, as well as I'm concerned about the independence of my country and about every victim that is dying here these days.
Yulia Mendal, thank you so much. I appreciate you joining us here on CNN. Be safe.
Thank you.
So they got married on the first day of the invasion, only to take up arms the next day. Irina Arivia's husband of 1 week, now on a mission. while she is in Kyiv. She joins us next.